Hi, my chapter is on Chapter 2, which is alternate assessments for students with multiple and severe disabilities. This chapter discusses how the IEP team decides which assessments that a student will take and the characteristics of alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards, which every state has, which are referred to as the AA-AAS standards. 2 long-standing goals of reform. Does anyone know what 2 long-standing goals of reform are current today? Give you some time to think about that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the goals. One of the goals is to close the achievement gap for low-achieving students, and the other is to prepare students for the workplace and college and career readiness skills. A more recent goal of reform is standards-based reform, which is the articulation of standards that all students should achieve. And especially with the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, it reinforced the inclusion of students with disabilities in standards-based reform. And that's why we are discussing this in this chapter. Now I'm going to discuss the characteristics of states' alternate assessments. All states have developed alternate assessments based on their standards, their AA-AAS standards. The book divides it up into questions, so I'll break down each question. The first question is, how will the alternate assessment information be used? Well, number 1, school accountability. It holds teachers accountable and school administrators accountable for what students should learn and what they should be teaching them. Number 2, student accountability. So it could be a graduation requirement or something that a student needs to meet, or it could be a combination of both of these. To address this question, it varies from state to state. All states are different. Students must require extensive instruction, so adaptations and modifications. There are certain federal guidelines that must be followed, and federal guidelines forbid that we use a student's disability label as the criterion. So we need to be careful of that. And usually these alternate achievement tests are for students with significant cognitive disabilities. To address what will be assessed, we want to try to keep it in line with the general curriculum. So we want to address the main domains such as math, language arts, science, maybe some history depending on the state. So we want to stick to those. Alternate assessments can be conducted in 3 different ways. The first way is by performance-based assessments, where the state creates an alternate assessment with pre-selected tasks that are given to all students. Another way is to have a portfolio, and the teacher selects the content of assessments following some state guidelines. And there's also checklists, where a teacher summarizes performance previously observed during classroom instruction and assessment. The assessments can be scored 3 different ways. The first way is teachers can score their own assessments. The second way is other teachers can score assessments. And the third is someone not involved in the assessment can score the assessment. Lastly, I'd quickly like to discuss linking assessment and instruction to state standards. There has been a set of criterion developed called Links for Academic Learning, or LAL. This model has been applied to help states evaluate how well the components within their alternate assessment systems align. So this is very important. Lastly, before I go, I'd like to talk about some connections with some of the other readings. One of the other things that we read was called The Least Dangerous Assumption, and that is a reading that is very important when thinking about reform and standards-based assessments. We want to make sure that we are not limiting our students and providing them with the best experiences possible.